Welcome to Never Rewrites. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to backseat quarterback of an old work story and see how experience and the years would have changed it. So to set it up, 20-ish years ago, I worked for a company and they made a strategic decision that was basically destroyed them. They had extended the Objective-C compiler for Macs, and as a result, they built their software around this. And as a result, every time Apple came out with a new version of Objective-C and had the compiler, they had to re-implement their compiler extensions so that they could start compiling the software on the newest versions. This was installed software on an app on the Apple ecosystem. This is pre-OS X. And as a result, they would slip further and further behind because there was no business case for spending the effort to extend the compiler. And as a result, years later, I've mentioned this story a few times. It was a Swedish company, and they hired myself and some other developers because they were in such a hole that cheap offshore labor was Americans, which Sweden is going to be pretty much the only country where you can get Americans as cheaper offshore labor.
Interesting.
But so here's this company, and they're drowning because they can't compile the software because they've made this decision. They extended.
To begin with, why did they extend it? Like, what was the business requirement that made them have to extend the compiler?
They wanted some visual UI features that the Mac operating system didn't support at the time.
Got it. Okay.
And so they're years into this, and so we say, never rewrite.
We do.
We do. We say that a lot. And here they are following that, and as a result, they have to keep extending this compiler. It's this never-ending tax. And so now, with the years of experience, do I still think they should not have rewritten, or do I think that they should have rewritten it at all? And I'm not sure.
Why aren't you sure?
Well, in this case, let's step through it. I think in this case, this is one of those, the technology was at a dead end, and that's one of the cases where a rewrite makes sense. Now, on a meta level, they should never have extended the compiler. And having extended the compiler once, they never should have done it again. They should have been like, oh, well, that was a terrible idea, on top of many other terrible ideas that these developers had. It's the only place I've ever been that had a thin server, fat client. And that is a reason why you would never do that. And it's terrible. It's hugely inefficient. For people who weren't paying attention, that usually you have a fat server with a thin client, which means that, like all SaaS and modern technology with with services, your browser's a thin client, and then it goes to talk to some server that's remote. This is the opposite, where you have a server that just pushes everything to the client, and the client has to deal with everything, and then pushes back just a little bit.
Got it.
There's a reason nobody does that. But going back to this question of the compiler, if you've now, right, and they're now 2 or 3 years in, and they're now under the gun because literally this company had it was back in the days of installed software, and it was installed software, and it was expensive enough that they also could tell you, it was installed on a Mac. So, again, weird decisions that this company made.
Yeah.
They had Mac servers and Mac desktops for the clients. And we would have to, at this point, buy a Mac, downgrade it to an older version of the OS so that we can install this thing. And so now I'm trying to figure out, with the hindsight, how would me today advise me of 20 years ago, okay, you guys are totally screwed. How do you get out of this?
I have an initial kind of thought, but I remember in one of the prior episodes we were talking about, like, you can like it was the episode where we were talking about does not rewriting kind of make you like force you into old
Mm-hmm.
architecture, into old tools. And I was saying, okay, well, you could still like fragment and thesis ship parts of your software
Mm-hmm.
by using the strangler fig pattern and leaving the old system there, but you don't have two systems going because you're porting over new functionality while deleting the old one once you're fully cut over. So you never have to fix two systems. So that was in a SaaS kind of world a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit trickier, it sounds like, in this situation since this is the compiler level, and there's not like I'm guessing, or let's pontificate here. Is there a way to strangler fig this approach where you aren't backed into like you were saying? Okay, in this case, this might be one of the few cases because you had a dead end in your technology or whatever. Is there a way to port thesis ship the port?
I think there would have been. In this case, the the change, right? The thing that they added to the compiler was to support some UI framework that they also built.
Mm-hmm.
And so the alternative, right, without revisiting every decision ever, you need to rebuild this UI using the standard tools and
Mm-hmm.
not and find a way to do it without extending the compiler. And so I think what you need is you either need to have a version of the UI that maybe doesn't look as good,
Yeah.
that doesn't use all these new features, or you need to build a whole new UI framework. Um, right, you'd have to rebuild. You have to build a framework that mocks all these calls that the compiler is pretending to have,
Mm-hmm.
and then does something so that you don't need to rebuild the whole UI, or you need to rebuild the whole UI to get rid of the calls. And so I think, again, it's been many years, so I don't know exactly what they had done, but yeah, it would either be you'd have to create a new framework that does not right get the real compiler and mock out the calls so that you can compile the existing code with the real compiler and not have it blow
Mm-hmm.
up,
Yeah.
which could be a giant project. Or you have a new project where you are building a new UI, but this is again a GUI UI, like it's a deep installed UI. It's not like a MVC style system
Right.
where it'd be easy to just say, "Oh, well, I'll build a new front end controllers."
So I guess some things that kind of like stick out to you. Maybe I'll ask some more
Mhm.
questions about how you mentioned that this might be why the company failed. Like this never ending tax theoretically could have led to the failure of this company, or did it actually lead to the failure?
The company failed because they couldn't ship software.
Got it.
When
And
I
this
was
was the main
there,
thing
yeah,
preventing it.
when I was there, they would do quarterly updates. So you'd have one release a quarter, and that would be
Okay.
followed by frantically spending a month fixing all the bugs that you didn't realize you had. And the reason we had quarterly releases, and also we're having to do downgrades, and you had to use the specific Macs, the company had to supply the Macs,
Mm-hmm.
and all of these things. And again, they could get away with that to some extent because this was trading software, and they had a really killer feature. Um, excuse me. And so people would put up with it, but it was not good software, and they couldn't make the software better because it was really hard to update the UI,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really hard to update the UI because of this compiler issue.
And how
And
often was this an issue? Like how often did a new version get released such that you would have to keep backporting the fixes to the compiler?
I believe Apple would come out with an updated version of the compiler every 6 months to a year
Oh
back
wow.
then. And you could ignore them, but at some point, because of, and this is again pre OS X, so it was not a, it was a highly specific binary thing that Apple had.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, you needed to recompile your software so that it would continue to run on the Mac OS. And if you didn't, then you couldn't update your Mac OS anymore. And that
Yeah.
was the
Wow.
killer.
what a weird. I'm guessing. I guess like I'm very confused at the original. Like why you would choose to hamstring yourself in that way, knowing that there was already a particular cadence in which Apple would be releasing updates, and that you would have to be reworking this constantly.
I
Hmm.
just don't think they thought it through.
Yeah. Okay.
Knowing those developers, I they wanted to give the user an amazing experience, and by doing this thing, they could make the UI do things that nobody else could do, and they thought it was worth it.
So at no point did someone go, "Oh, we're spending so much time backporting this thing that we're unable to ship. We should spin up a side project that investigates moving away from this deep, deeply ingrained mistake that we've made."
Mm, if they had ever said it, I didn't hear it. When I was there,
Hmm.
they had started supplementing the Swedish developers with Russian developers whose job it was to do the backport. And the Russians and the Americans commiserated that this was insane, and we had no idea what the Swedish people were thinking.
The Russians and the Americans agreed.
Yes, the Russians and the Americans
Excellent.
agreed.
This is the
This,
last time that that they've agreed. When
yes,
was this?
like
2001.
2007, 2008.
Gotcha.
It's been a while,
Interesting. Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
this is not only installed software, but it is installed Mac servers,
Yeah. Interesting.
which the Power PC, that was the architecture at the time. Had to drag that out
Do
of.
they have any Mac server at all these days? Do they still maintain that?
I'm not sure if they do. Uh, what the what really killed everything, especially the project that was going on. Apple finally stopped updating the Objective C compiler because they introduced Swift,
Oh yeah, that's right.
and so then it was now a double dead end where Objective C was no longer going to be the thing, and there were tools to port your Objective C to Swift, but they certainly were not going to support custom compiler extensions that you decided that you needed.
Well, it seems like that would have been the perfect time to be like, okay, guys, we were going to swap to Swift, and now we have to get off this kind of weird thing that
Well,
we
that's when
did
I left
in
the
implementing
company, so
Swift.
I don't know what they eventually
Um,
did. I know the company lingered on for another 5 or 6 years before eventually folding.
hmm, we have to find somebody from the company
But we
and finish the
must.
story.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm curious. I will find someone. I know someone. Some of the people who were on, who stayed, and maybe they can tell us more. Um, but
So yeah, looking back on it, then what are the first, like, just what are three solutions, if you can even think of three, for either preventing the problem, or if you're in the problem and you had the knowledge of today and you were in that same group of people, what would you say?
right. Well, obviously, telling people not to make the mistake that they made is not helpful.
Right. Assuming
So I
they've already
think
made the mistake, had a
right.
gap
Assuming
in
they
this.
made the mistake. So
Yeah.
the first thing I would go with is, could we build a framework that would allow us to not to fake it, right? Instead of extending the compiler, build a framework that's going to do all these things that compiles, and then compile our thing with the compile, like move all the special functionality into a framework and have
Hmm.
the framework that compiles. The second version of all that is, can we move to separate, MVC was a thing at the time, that wasn't how they built it, but can we move it so that we have the UI portion of the application is well separated and encapsulated, and then make a new version of the UI that doesn't need all this stuff,
Yeah.
and then we could strangle the old version out. Hopefully, I think that's the best option you've got, because the third option is just build a new UI, uh, which is, we talk, that's a full rewrite and you're going to fail.
Yeah. And I think, what year is this again? You said around 2005, 7?
7 or 8, I think.
Okay, yeah. By this point, the concepts of splitting views separate from built-in logic has been somewhat established, because
Yes.
early 2000s was like, okay, if you think of just the web aspect, it was like, okay, let's PHP is going to serve my HTML and do my backend logic, and everything's integrated.
Yes.
And so you had all that kind of all the logic tied into your views. So at that point, there's a lot of frameworks and patterns established. They're like, oh, this is a bad idea. We should split them out.
Right. And in this case, the client, because it was a fat client,
Mm-hmm.
there was actually a lot of business logic there. There was a lot of there. It wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
thin client where, the
Yeah,
MVC is really just, you could do it all in one. There was actually a
that's part of the big mistake. Yeah,
substantial
yeah.
client.
Got
Right. Well, thank you for looking back with me.
it. Of course.
Thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.